Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Sports Insight with your host, Alamdar Khan. And as you know, this show is all about sports from all across the globe. You guys can definitely reach in touch with us on our social media handles, which is at the rate of Indus News Sports. That is on Twitter and Instagram. Anyways, what we'll do is we'll go to the headlines first. Yes, the first news is Pakistani squad has started practicing in National Stadium, Karachi for the first test against South Africa. Newport County keeper Tom King scored the longest goal ever in the history of football. We'll talk about that. And yes, Manchester City striker Sergio Aguero tested positive for COVID-19. We're talking about that. And yes, Brooklyn Nets actually lost against Cleveland, which is going to be an interesting subject to talk about. The trio managed to fail Brooklyn Nets. And yes, from the world of tennis, Australian Open cluster actually grows with regards to coronavirus. 2 more people tested positive and not named yet. And yes, those were the headlines. And you know, we're talking more about Pakistan versus South Africa, which is actually going to be super exciting because the upcoming event starts on the 26th of January, which will be the first test. Pakistan has announced its team, and it's going to be interesting to see those young lads performing for the country. Not only that, they've actually started practicing. And before I talk about anything else with regards to that, South Africa also is pretty much ready. They've announced their T20 squad, their test squad. They're also ready. It's going to be tricky for them because, you know, most of the team members from the test squad will fly back to New Zealand, to South Africa. That's the entire plan. But anyways, to discuss more of the happenings right now, I still have our guest again, Tasneem Samar Khan. Thank you for joining us all the way from New Zealand.
Thank you for having me, Alamdar. Pleased to be here.
Great. All right, Tasneem, so we'll start off with how Pakistan is planning to expedite this entire perspective because it had been a tricky journey for us with regards to cricket. So the new changes that we've announced, how confident do we see? Because the practice sessions are on, the new team is practicing ready. Obviously, the young lads are there. Will we be hopeful? Obviously, Babar Azam is back. That's one of the key points for us. So how do you see this entire clash between Pakistan and South Africa end up?
I think it's going to be a great contest. It's going to be tight, definitely. Pakistan is in a little bit of a transition stage with their test side, but so is South Africa. So it's going to be relatively evenly matched. Any side that is hosting a team that is touring should be very confident in their ability to beat them unless there is a massive gulf between the two sides. And there isn't here. The two sides are ranked pretty close to each other, and they've had some similar struggles over the years. And it's going to be great to see Babar Azam captaining, just to see what he's like as a captain and see him back playing again. But right. I think that South Africa should not be underestimated at all because they have a couple of key players that could prove really important in Pakistani conditions.
Right. If we look at Babar Azam coming back, I was having this talk with one of the experts, and, you know, everybody's like putting all the pressure on Babar Azam. You know, so much immense pressure right now, not only from us, obviously with expectations, but obviously from the head coach as well. So how do you see that impacting his ability to perform? Because that's going to be very, very hard.
I think one of the things that's always been unique about Babar Azam from his under 19 days up until now is that his ability to respond to pressure has always been very positive. Right. Some individuals, whether it's in cricket or any walk in life, right, you can either take pressure and it propels you, or it's detrimental. So for Babar, it's always been something that pushes him. I've never seen him particularly flustered, particularly worried. He knows himself and his game. So I wouldn't worry about pressure on Babar. He does have a ridiculous record playing in Pakistan, and obviously that only comes from a handful of matches. But I think he's looking at an average of around 200, which is insane. It's absolutely remarkable. It's not something that can stay from such a small sample size, but it does tell you whether or not he's comfortable playing in Pakistan, and I think we should all be confident in that. But let's not forget, as good a player as Babar Azam is, there is no team in the world that can perform on the basis of one man alone. We saw that with Australia recently. You know, India lost key players in their side, Australia didn't have the same issues, and despite having players like Smith and Marnus Labuschagne, they still faltered. So you can never rely on you're only as strong as your weakest players are. So
Right.
Pakistan are not as strong as Babar Azam, but they're as strong as everybody else in the side and how they all work together.
Right. So the differences or the situation and the scenario, obviously, we have one plus that, I remember we were discussing and we had a conversation with regards to how Pakistanis are unable to face those short balls. But the pitch, the conditions
Yes.
in Pakistan will definitely be on our favor. South Africa, however, came to Pakistan and they were, cleared with a quarantine perspective within no time. We have like limitations. I mean, like, if we go to Australia or New Zealand, it becomes a very technically very hard for the players to, be in isolation and stuff. But South Africa is practicing as well. So I've been told that there's a major possibility of South Africa playing two spinners and two fast bowlers. How do you see that plan of action work with our conditions?
I think that's a very realistic. It's a likelihood, in all honesty. South Africa are not dummies. They are one of the strongest touring sides in the world,
Right.
and they've always been very adept at understanding the conditions that they're playing in. And Pakistani conditions are such. Obviously, having two strong fast bowlers and then strong spinners is really vital. In regards to the test side, the situation with South Africa is that they have Keshav Maharaj, who has improved year on year as a spinner, and they're not short of other spinners in their side.
Right.
They've also got Nortje, who is a remarkable player whose career has probably been a little bit of a start-stop over the last few years due to injury.
Right.
But he bowls incredibly fast, and you mentioned Pakistan's lack of ability with the short ball.
Right.
South Africa are one of the strongest bowling units in terms of utilizing that short ball.
Right.
And actually, I think we all remember as Pakistanis the situation with Dwayne Olivier a few years ago, who is absolutely skilled in utilizing the short ball. So while Pakistani conditions are definitely going to favor the home side, and the South African bowlers are going to be aware that they need to rely a little bit more on reverse than they normally would,
Right.
they're very intelligent bowlers. They've got Rabada, they've got Nortje,
Right.
and they're absolutely going to bring bowling that's going to make Pakistan, that's going to test them, particularly a side of 9 uncapped players.
Right. So we're looking. So basically, you're actually suggesting that the eventual conclusion of the facing or the clash that we're going to have will surely turn out to be massively aggressive and going to be very interesting. I still remember having a conversation with one of the South African journalists, and he actually told us the unpredictability of Pakistan is almost as equal to the unpredictability of South Africa, right?
They're brothers in arms, absolutely.
Right. Okay, fine. So the current scenario, so they basically announced two squads. The first squad for the test, the second squad for the T20s. But obviously, the squad, the major key players, De Kock and major team leads will probably be flying back. So how do you see that impacting their team on the T20 side?
So this is the COVID world that we live in. If we want to play cricket, we're going to have some unique situations like this. And it's a little bit of a challenge. I think there are only 4 men who overlap between the test side and the T20 side, with a lot of people going home. I think that indicates to us that South Africa are focusing on their test cricket. They're bringing their strongest side to Pakistan,
Right.
and then they're taking their strongest side against Australia. I think the situation that they're in with their T20 side is it's a side that's in a little bit of flux. It's building. It's got some amazing strengths, but they haven't come together as a team.
Right.
So I think that is probably not something that they're worried about right now. Obviously, we have the T20 World Cup coming up in, about 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, let's hope
everybody
all goes well with COVID, because that's coming. That's also tricky.
That is very tricky. We had one cancelled last year that was supposed to be in Australia, and we've got this one scheduled for India this year.
Right.
However, it's going to be in the back of everybody's minds, even though the World Test Championship has taken center stage in the last maybe month or so of cricket. Everybody's going to be thinking about their T20 side, which
Right.
is why you actually see a lot of touring teams at the moment playing test matches and playing T20s, because everybody's looking forward to the T20 World Cup. Pakistan's T20 squad has not yet been announced, but I
Right.
don't imagine it would be ridiculously different to the one that we saw in New Zealand about 3-4 short weeks ago.
Right.
So Pakistan will have strength in the T20 squad just for a little bit of stability. But
Right.
don't forget, we're looking at a test side with 9 uncapped players. So where we've got a little bit of stability in the T20 side, we're lacking it in the test squad.
Right. So okay. One thing that I'd want to ask, which obviously I asked one of my other guests as well, does Pakistan currently carry a strategy, because having those new youngsters coming on board, because until and unless you have that strategy, if we look at India versus Australia, India just came out with a strategy of doing it, right? Even though losing on 36 all out on a test and then making a draw and then making a comeback, I'm sure they had this super aggressive strategy that managed them to do so. Do you think Pakistan has devised a strategy as yet?
I think that's an interesting comparison because the cricket world did see something remarkable. Australia don't lose at the Gabba. Australia don't lose in Australia,
Right.
at least often. And we just saw a very depleted India side win an incredibly thrilling test series. And there's a few reasons for that, Alamdar. I don't think we should be expecting the same stuff from Pakistan just yet.
Right.
One of the major reasons, India lost key players. They didn't even have the superstar batsman that is Virat Kohli.
Right.
So they were struggling a little bit, but they kept mental fortitude and they kept a sight of their cricket in terms of technical aspects as well. One of the huge reasons for that is the absolute strength of India's development sides, their A side, and their domestic cricket. These
Right.
are the investments Pakistan must make to secure its test future. It's easier said than done,
Right.
obviously. One of the reasons that Pakistan's A side, that the Shaheens as they're now called, have fallen behind some of the other countries in the world is the situation that Pakistan's had with having an artificial home in the UAE.
Right.
Those times are over, but there has been a massive impact that lasted a decade. That is not something that is rectified overnight, but the focus for the PCB has to be strengthening development side. If you have, so Mohammad Siraj was playing the A side, gosh, as recently as about 6 months ago, 6 months to a year ago. And when he got his test cap, he was ready because the development sides are they're absolutely strong and they're consistent. And this is something that's lacking for Pakistan. Pakistan brought their to New
So
Zealand.
what I'm going to do is we'll continue this conversation, Tasneem, because it's going to an interesting turn. We'll be back after the short break. And yes, welcome back to the Sports Insight. Yes, we were talking to Tasneem Samar Khan all the way from New Zealand with regards to how Pakistan can actually devise, or how can we have that vision. Tasneem, thank you once again for being with us. So we were talking about the divisioning, or the idea of Pakistan investing, PCB investing in our key, for instance, if we talk about Shaheens, we need to focus more on that. So we were having a conversation with regards to that. So what's your vision with regards to that?
It's a long-term plan, Alamdar, and it kind of has to be, because you can't develop children into players that are playing internationally all over the world without understanding that they're going to falter at some point, and then they're going to need time, space, encouragement, confidence, and everything else to get better. While Shan Masood obviously really struggled recently, he actually characterizes a problem that we keep making. We play batsmen in home conditions, or previously UAE. They do well, they score well, they rack up some runs, and they get a little bit of form behind them. We then take them to foreign conditions where they often don't have enough time to acclimatize.
Right.
They have maybe toured once before, but maybe on the development level instead of on the men's test side level.
Right.
And then they filter, and then we say Nigalo, and we try and get rid of them. We try and add in more players. If you look at this test side that we have in front of us right now, there's approximately, I think, 20 players in that side, 9 of whom are uncapped. That's almost 50% of your players are uncapped.
Right.
While I am absolutely all for getting young guys into the system, getting them into the team, and sticking with them until the labor of that, the fruit of that labor comes to fruition, you can't just have this cycle of 2 series and then try again, 2 series and try someone else. So it has to be a very long-term plan.
Absolutely.
Now, if you look at the countries around us, we have that as a great example. I'm in New Zealand now, so I've gotten to see a lot of their cricket up close and personal. And Tim Southee is maybe one of the most important test bowlers in the world, one of the most successful test bowlers in the world. I don't know if you remember his debut or his first few years, but I'm sure there were a lot of people watching him saying, we don't understand why this guy is playing test cricket for New Zealand.
Right.
That is natural when you have a 20-year-old debut and they learn that the tools of their trade actually on the job. So what New Zealand did with somebody like Tim Southee is that they took someone with promise
Right.
and then they gave him experience. So that promise became actualized.
Right.
It sounds very simplistic when you say it like that, but that's something that we just don't do in Pakistan with our cricket, which is a real shame because we're losing a lot of talent. Tavish Khan is a good example.
Right.
He has great stats in, God, like the last 5 years.
Right.
Excuse me, 5 years before his recent form, and then maybe his last 3 years, he's been slowly losing that form. And now is when we've decided to give him selection. It doesn't make a massive amount of sense. We've got to pick people when they're good on form, or we think that there's enough belief in their talent and their ability to actualize it, and then stick with them long enough for them to actually be able to present it.
Right. So, like I said before, and the vision that you have with regards to obviously 9 uncapped players, but with experience comes wisdom, right? With experience, with
Yes.
the elder players, will they evolve into how they're supposed to? But for someone who's been, I mean, like, to be very honest, with the announcement of the new team, I was pretty happy about it because we've seen the previous performances of the specifically the top notch a few people like even Shan Masood once was like on his spot, but I think he's off his form these days. So I think he needs to practice more to get there, to get one. So you need to bring on those people that are actually in form. How does PCB, let's come to the point that, there was this meeting yesterday, a press conference of Misbah, and he actually said that, he's accepting the idea of being grilled for whatever happened in New Zealand. But he's hopeful. He's trying his best. That he said that, I'm hopeful this time that, while being in Pakistan, we'll hopefully try to ensure that, we fight till the last. Do you think, would there be any specific action from PCB's end, for instance, if something goes not as planned?
Well, I think that there were some movements post New Zealand. I'm not entirely convinced that those movements were necessary. I think sometimes instead of administrative and the governance reactions, we have to just look quite simply at the on-field performance at the cricket. I'll take the example of Sri Lanka. So obviously they're playing right now at home against England.
Right.
In the first test, had an absolutely dismal performance with the bat.
Right.
They improved throughout the test match. Today, they've just started their first innings against England in the second test match, and that improvement has only shot up. They're not repeating the same mistakes of the first innings of the first test, and that's on-the-job learning, right? It's in the moment learning. And that's something that's the action that we should be looking for rather than asking for resignations, new test caps, inclusions. That's part of the package.
Right.
But a wholesale changing of any side is never going to give you the stability that you need to win. One of the other things that we have to think about is, what is the aim here? Is the aim to tour countries like New Zealand, a notoriously difficult place to play cricket, where a very strong side like Australia is about to come tour in about a month's time?
Right.
They're going to struggle. And they're a much stronger side than Pakistan currently is. So everybody struggles when they tour, particularly in places where the conditions are so unfamiliar. But what you need to look at as a touring side is that you learned something and that you implemented it.
Right.
I think that Pakistan's performance was probably better in the first test in New Zealand than the second. So I didn't see that learning curve there.
Right.
And that's the problem that I have. I don't think that going home and firing and hiring and like switching people around is the right answer. It's definitely not one where it means, I don't know, dropping somebody like Mohammad Abbas, who is very, very, very potent in certain conditions and not so in others, because batsmen have learned to mitigate some of his strengths. So they've learned to play against him. It's on Abbas now to go away and work on his game so that he can do something a little bit different. That means that batsmen coming out of their crease, batting out of their crease a little, won't take away his wicket-taking ability. That's the thing that's important. So I think what the PCB should be doing is focusing on, again, I'm so sorry to bore you with the word structures and development.
No, it's absolutely
but that is exactly, that's where the trick lies, you know? They should be looking at the NCA.
Right.
They should be looking at training situations. They should be thinking about how it is that they improve each of their individual players. When you improve your individuals, when you improve your unit and you work together, you're going to have better results.
Right. Anyways, one more thing that, I was just thinking with regards to conditioning. Whenever these young lads who actually have that vision and want to prove and want to play for Pakistan, They come with that vision.
Yes.
That's an observation that how I've seen it so far evolving into. So they initially perform to their level best, the best of the metal. They try to be there, and then slowly and gradually after that, they start losing that. So we need. So do you think we need that some individual with them to condition them? Talking about, for instance, new lads in Sri Lanka is still evolving with their work. England is doing the same. And we, like you said, destructuring will not help us. But the point is, do you think we need someone to condition these individuals who are actually the young lads who are actually coming in, because they need someone to be their mentor, right? So without that mentorship, I don't think our team will eventually survive to that point where we want it to survive.
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think it's as simple as having someone to condition them. What that requires is a wholesale culture, your entire culture. And it's something, when Mickey Arthur was coach, the Pakistan side did a very long, I think 62-day tour of the UK. And I worked with the side throughout that tour. So I got to see them up close and personal. And something that I noticed that Mickey Arthur did very well is institute a balanced culture within the squad and for the players. Now, that's just because I've had up close and personal experience with Mickey Arthur. It doesn't have to be a certain individual, but what the trick is a culture where players feel safe, where they feel a little bit nurtured, so they can come out of their shell, they can talk about their problems, they can talk about their improvements, and they have the space to be themselves, whatever that looks like, because not every test cricketer looks the same, nor should they. And that is a skill that we need to have as man managers to understand how to bring the best out of their players. This phenomena that you mentioned about players performing well and then maybe losing a little bit of medal, I think Hassan Ali is actually a great example of this. He has clawed his way back into this after poor performance, then injury, and then domestic performance. That's what he did. He didn't just go to the Qaeda-e-Azam and take wickets. What he did was show fortitude and mental resolve. That's what we saw from the Indian guys. We saw Washington Sundar facing bowlers that are far more experienced with a very dangerous reputation without fear. And I think that fear aspect, some of it is going to be around Pakistan cricket, but some of it is to do with our wider culture in our society as well. If we fail, whether we're talking about exams, jobs, cricket, anything, if we fail once, people don't let us forget that we failed. That failure becomes a joke. It becomes a point that we make forever and ever, and we don't let people move on. So some of this might be to do with our wholesale culture that will not benefit us in competitive drives, that will not benefit us against sides that believe in self-belief more than anything else. A positive self-image is always going to be beneficial.
Well, thank you so very much for the wisdom that you've put in. I hope that positive image carries us a long way. That was the same Samar Khan all the way from New Zealand. Once again, thank you very much. And that was from the world of cricket. Yes, the series will be interesting. There's a lot of growth, there's a lot of expectations that we're seeing with regards to Pakistani team performing. And obviously, they have like 9 uncapped players as discussed. But like I said, like she said, that the positivity will definitely take us a long way. Anyways, from the world, let's switch over to another sport, which is obviously the football. Yes, EFL. In the EFL, Newport County keeper Tom King actually scored the longest football goal ever, which is obviously interesting because he literally shot from one post to another, and the ball actually traveled 96.01 meters. So this is now actually going into the Guinness Book of World Record, and the 25-year-old the goalkeeper actually ended up making the entire match end up in a draw. But this was a brilliant kick, and I guess a bit of luck that actually ensured that the goal goes that way. Anyways, let's switch over to the Premier League. Yes, another development in the Premier League. Sergio Aguero actually tested positive for COVID-19. Yes, the 32-year-old Argentinian striker has been self-isolating himself already, but before that, he just recently found out that he's suffering from the coronavirus. Let's hope for the best for him and hope he gets well soon. Let's switch over to the NBA side of the world. Yes, a major upset. Yes, Cleveland's actually managed to take Brooklyn Nets down. Not to forget that Brooklyn Nets now is like those 3 trios, which is Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and James Harden, were unable to win. They only managed to score 96 points. Yes, this trio actually managed to score just 96 points, and Cleveland actually won the match by 147 to 135. It was not even close. Like recently, we saw this match in which LA Lakers actually lost, but that was close. This was not even close. So sometimes when you have a lot of superstars, it kind of gets to that point of no return. So maybe Kevin Durant needs to devise a better strategy, and James Harden and Kyrie Irving should also be focusing on that. And not to forget that Kyrie Irving just recently came back after his 7 missed matches, and this is definitely a major upset in terms of the NBA side of the world. And the last news that I'm going to talk about is from the world of tennis. If you all remember, there has been a heavy dose of hypothetical situation that has been created in Australia because of the fact that Australia Open is currently scheduled. And what happened is that 2 more players ended up testing positive for coronavirus, and Djokovic and so many other players were actually having arguments with the government to let them practice and self-isolate and stuff. But eventually there are 2 more players that have actually tested positive, and the cases have actually went up to 10 people positive. So the interesting thing is that there are over 1,000 players that have actually arrived safely in Australia corona-free. But that's the tricky part with corona. We just don't know. We need to follow the rules and the regulations given to us by the company and by the entire government perspectives. And you can't really challenge the government side to it, because Djokovic actually did that. He tried because he wanted to practice more, he wanted to perform more. But until and unless you are safe and everybody else is safe, that is the key priority of any government. Anyways, guys, thank you very much for being a part of the show. You can reach us on our social media handle, which is @Indus News Sports. Till then, take good care of yourselves. All the best, and bye-bye.